I never imagined a quiet classroom would become the place where my life started slipping out of control. From the outside, everything about me looked stable. I had a long relationship that most people called perfect. We had been together for years, long enough for routines to replace excitement and polite conversations to replace real connection. Nothing dramatic had happened between us. No huge fights. No explosive arguments. Just a slow, quiet distance that grew so gradually I didn't even notice it until silence became the loudest thing in our home. Every morning followed the same pattern. Wake up, exchange a few automatic words, drink coffee across from someone who barely looked up from their phone, then leave for the day. It felt less like living with a partner and more like sharing space with a polite stranger. I told myself this was normal. People said relationships settle down after a while. Passion fades, comfort replaces it. I repeated those explanations like a mantra because admitting something was missing felt far more dangerous than my days at the college were predictable too. I spent most of my time in the same building, walking the same hallways, entering the same classrooms. The environment should have been lively, full of energy and curiosity, but for me it had become mechanical. Teach, answer questions, organize materials, repeat. Students came and went every semester, but my life stayed exactly the same. Then one week everything shifted in a way I never expected. A new instructor joined the department. At first I barely noticed him. People come and go all the time in academic environments, and introductions during staff meetings are usually forgettable. But there was something different about the way he carried himself. He wasn't loud or overly confident. In fact, he seemed calm, observant, almost quiet. While everyone else talked over each other, he listened. Our first real conversation happened by accident. I was organizing papers in one of the empty classrooms when he stepped in, looking slightly lost. He asked if the room was free for the next hour. His voice was steady and relaxed, the kind of voice that made people naturally pause and pay attention. We ended up talking longer than either of us expected. Nothing dramatic, just small conversation about schedules, classes, and the confusing layout of the building. But when he laughed at something I said, it caught me off guard. Not because the joke was good, but because it had been a while since someone reacted to me like that. Like they were genuinely interested. After that day we started crossing paths more often. At first it was quick greetings in the hallway. Then it turned into short conversations between classes. He asked questions most people never bothered with. How long I had been teaching. What subjects I actually enjoyed. Whether I ever felt burned out. The strange part was how easy it felt to answer him. Normally I kept my personal thoughts locked away, especially at work. But with him, the words came out naturally. Maybe it was because he listened without interrupting. Maybe it was because his attention felt sincere instead of polite. Little by little those conversations became the most interesting part of my day. I started noticing details I shouldn't have paid attention to. The way his eyes focused completely when someone spoke. The calm confidence in his posture. The way he remembered small things I mentioned days earlier. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. No flirting. No bold moves. Just quiet moments that lingered a little longer than they should have. One afternoon we both ended up staying late. Most of the building had emptied out, leaving the halls unusually quiet. I was finishing paperwork inside one of the classrooms when he walked in carrying a stack of books. He paused when he saw me, then smiled in that relaxed way I had started recognizing. We talked again, longer this time. The conversation drifted away from work and into more personal territory. He asked if I liked teaching or if I had simply gotten used to it. I admitted something I rarely said out loud. Sometimes I felt like my life had become predictable to the point of feeling unreal. He didn't laugh or brush it off. Instead, he understood that he shared small pieces of his own story too, how he had changed jobs more than once, how routine made him restless. The honesty between us created a strange kind of closeness that neither of us acknowledged directly. At some point I realized we were standing much closer than before. The room felt different. Quieter. Smaller. That I could hear faint sounds from the hallway outside, but inside the classroom the air felt heavy with something unspoken. Neither of us moved away. For a brief moment our conversation stopped completely. The silence should have been awkward, yet it wasn't. It felt charged, like something invisible had suddenly appeared between us. He looked at me in a way that made my thoughts scatter. Not aggressively, not boldly, just attentively. Like he was studying a question he hadn't decided how to ask. My heart started beating faster, which made no sense. Nothing had happened. We were simply standing there. Two co-workers talking in an empty classroom, but the feeling was undeniable. I stepped back slightly, suddenly aware of how close we had been. He seemed to notice the shift too. For a second neither of us spoke, then footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway outside. The sound snapped the moment apart. Instantly he cleared his throat and glanced toward the door while I quickly gathered the papers on the desk, pretending I had been focused on work the entire time. When the footsteps passed and the hallway grew quiet again, we both laughed awkwardly, the tension dissolving just enough to make the situation feel normal again. But something had already changed. As he left the classroom that evening, he paused at the door and looked back at me for a brief moment, not long enough to say anything, just long enough to make one thing clear. Whatever had almost happened in that empty classroom wasn't my imagination, and for the first time in years, the quiet routine of my life suddenly felt unpredictable. Something shifted after that, and this time I couldn't ignore it no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It started showing itself in patterns, in small repeated moments that no longer felt random. My partner began to feel distant in a way I couldn't explain. She was still there, still talking, still responding, but something in her attention had changed. It was like she was present physically but somewhere else mentally. I'd be speaking, and she'd nod, but her eyes would drift, like she was thinking about something she didn't want to say out loud. At first, I told myself it was normal. Everyone gets tired. Everyone has things on their mind. But then it kept happening. Messages that used to come instantly started arriving late. Calls felt shorter. Conversations lost depth. The warmth that once felt natural now felt forced. Not completely gone, just not the same. At the same time, my brothers started acting differently too. The younger one became overly involved in my life. He'd check in more than usual, asking questions that felt unnecessary. He wanted to know where I was, what I was doing, how things were between me and her. His tone was casual, but there was something underneath it that didn't sit right. The older one went in the opposite direction. He became quieter. More distant. He avoided eye contact sometimes, especially when certain topics came up. The same person who used to speak directly now chose silence more often than words, individually. None of it was enough to accuse anyone of anything. But together, it created a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. One evening, I called my partner, and she didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how long it took her to respond. Hours passed. When she finally called back, her voice sounded normal, but there was a pause before she spoke, like she was preparing what to say. I asked where she had been. She gave a simple answer. It made sense on the surface, but something about it felt rehearsed. Too clean. Too quick. I didn't push further. I told myself I was imagining things again, but that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything. The late replies, the distant behavior, the strange energy between my brothers and her. I tried to separate each moment, to find logic in it, but the more I thought, the more it all started connecting in ways I didn't want to believe. Still, I held on to trust, because the alternative was too heavy. Days passed, and the tension inside me kept building. I started noticing how conversations would suddenly stop when I walked into a room. Not dramatically, just a quick shift, like a topic had been cut off mid-sentence. They would continue talking, but about something else. Something safer. Once, I saw my younger brother using his phone, smiling in a way that felt familiar. The kind of smile people don't realize they have when they're talking to someone special. When he noticed me looking, he locked his phone instantly and changed his expression that I didn't say anything. I just watched. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Another time, I mentioned my partner casually during a conversation. My older brother reacted, but not with words. Just a slight pause. A shift in posture. Something subtle, but enough for me to notice. When I looked at him, he avoided my eyes. That's when the doubt stopped being occasional and started becoming constant, that I began questioning everything, even myself. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was creating problems that didn't exist. Maybe stress was getting to me. I tried to convince myself of all of it, but deep down, none of those explanations felt right, because instincts don't lie that easily. That I started paying closer attention, not openly, not in a way anyone could notice. Just small observations. Who reacts to what? Who avoids which topics? Who becomes uncomfortable when certain names come up? And the more I observed, the more uneasy I felt. There were too many coincidences. Too many small things lining up in ways they shouldn't, but I still didn't confront anyone, not yet. That I wasn't ready to hear something I couldn't unhear. I wasn't ready to destroy what could still be nothing more than doubt. So instead, I stayed quiet and let it build inside me. One night, I checked my phone and realized something strange. My last message to her had been delivered, but not read for a long time. That had never happened before. When she finally replied, it was short. Unusually short. That I stared at the screen longer than I should have. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just a bad mood or a rough phase. Something was being hidden from me. Something I wasn't supposed to see, and for the first time, I stopped defending them in my head. Instead of asking myself if I was wrong, I started asking a different question: what if I'm right? That question changed everything, because once it enters your mind, it doesn't leave. It grows. It forces you to look at things differently. It forces you to notice what you once ignored, and suddenly, all the trust one had didn't feel like strength anymore. It felt like blindness. That I didn't know the truth yet. I didn't have proof. But I knew one thing for certain: something was going on behind my back, and this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. That I decided to stop asking questions out loud and start looking for answers quietly, because if there was a truth hidden somewhere in all of this, I was going to find it, no matter how much it hurt. Once I stopped doubting myself, everything became clearer. Not easier, just clearer. The confusion that once protected me disappeared, and in its place came a quiet certainty that something real was being hidden. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. I just watched, listened, and waited. Patterns don't lie when you stop ignoring them. That I began noticing how often my younger brother was unavailable at the same time as her. Not always, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make me uncomfortable. The timing lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. Whenever I tried to reach him during those moments, he wouldn't answer. Later, he'd come back with casual excuses, the kind that sound normal unless you're already paying attention. The older one stayed distant. He barely involved himself in anything anymore. But his silence started to feel louder than words. Sometimes, I caught him looking at me like he wanted to say something but chose not to. That hesitation said more than anything he could have explained that I didn't rush. I needed certainty. One day, I decided to test something simple. I told my partner I'd be busy for the evening, somewhere far enough that she wouldn't expect me back. She responded normally, nothing suspicious in her tone. But something about how easily she accepted it made me uneasy. Instead of going where I said I would, I stayed back. Quiet. Watching, time moved slower than usual. Every minute felt stretched. My mind kept telling me to stop, to walk away, to trust them one last time. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Hours passed, and then I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. That it wasn't dramatic. No loud confrontation, no sudden chaos. Just a moment. A simple, undeniable moment that erased every doubt I had been holding onto. She wasn't where she said she would be, and she wasn't alone. My younger brother was with her. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. I stood there, staring, waiting for something to prove me wrong. But nothing changed. The way they stood, the way they spoke, the way they looked at each other, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't misunderstanding. It was familiarity. Comfort. Something that had clearly been there for longer than I realized. That should have been the worst part, but it wasn't, because as I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, I noticed something else. Someone else. My older brother. That he wasn't surprised. He wasn't reacting like someone who had just discovered something shocking. He was calm. Too calm. Like this was normal. Like he already knew. That realization hit harder than anything else. This wasn't just a secret between two people, this was something all three of them were involved in different ways. That I stepped forward before I could stop myself. The moment they saw me, everything changed. The comfort on their faces disappeared. The ease between them vanished. Silence took over, heavy and suffocating. No one spoke first. I looked at her, waiting for an explanation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever she was about to say didn't come out. My younger brother avoided my eyes completely, like looking at me would make it worse. The older one finally met my gaze, but there was no shock in his expression. Just something that looked like guilt buried under acceptance, that told me everything I needed to know. How long? Was the only thing I managed to say. No one answered immediately. That silence stretched longer than anything I had ever experienced. It was louder than any confession could have been. Finally, she spoke. Not clearly, not directly. Just fragments. Words that tried to soften the truth but only made it worse. She said it wasn't planned. She said it just happened. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far. That I didn't react, because none of that mattered. That I turned to my younger brother. He still couldn't look at me. That alone confirmed everything. The person who once stood beside me without hesitation now couldn't even face me. Then I looked at the older one. You knew. It wasn't a question. That he didn't deny it. That was the moment something inside me broke completely. Not loudly, not visibly. Just quietly, like a final thread snapping after being stretched too far. All the small moments I ignored came rushing back at once. The silence, the glances, the strange behavior, the distance. It all made sense now. Every single piece of it. That I wasn't just betrayed in one way. That I was surrounded by it. The person I loved chose someone else, and my own brothers allowed it to happen. One actively, the other silently. That I felt anger, but it didn't come out the way I expected. There was no shouting, no chaos. Just a heavy emptiness replacing everything else. That I realized something in that moment. Trust doesn't disappear slowly when it's broken like this. That it vanishes instantly. That I didn't ask for details. I didn't need explanations. There was nothing they could say that would undo what I had already seen. So I stepped back, not because I was weak, but because I understood something they didn't. This wasn't a mistake, this was a choice. Repeated, hidden, and shared, and I was the only one who didn't know that. I looked at all three of them one last time, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't recognize the people standing in front of me, not her, not my brothers, not anyone. Everything I believed about them, about us, about loyalty, it was all gone, and in that silence, surrounded by people who once meant everything to me, I felt completely alone, not because I had no one, but because the ones I had were never truly there. I didn't say anything else after that. There was nothing left to ask, nothing left to understand. The truth had already done its damage. Words at that point would have just been noise trying to cover something that was already broken beyond repair. That I walked away, not fast, not dramatically. Just a quiet decision to remove myself from a place where I clearly didn't belong anymore. Behind me, I could hear movement, like someone was about to follow, maybe to explain, maybe to stop me. But no one did. And honestly, that was the clearest answer I could have received. That night felt longer than any night I've ever lived through. Not because of what happened, but because of what settled in afterward. The silence. The replay of everything in my head. Every moment I ignored, every instinct I silenced, every time I chose trust over doubt. That I didn't cry the way people expect. There was no immediate breakdown, no visible collapse. It was something heavier than that. A kind of numbness that spread slowly, taking over everything until you can't even tell what you're supposed to feel anymore. The next few days were even worse. Messages started coming in. First from her. Long texts trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to reshape what had already been exposed. She said it wasn't what it looked like, even though it was exactly what it looked like. She said she still cared about me, as if that somehow made any difference that I didn't reply. Then came my younger brother. Short messages at first, testing the silence. Then longer ones, filled with regret. He said he didn't mean to hurt me. Said things got out of control. Said he never wanted it to reach this point, but it did reach that point. And it didn't happen in one moment. It happened over time, through choices he kept making that I ignored him too. The older one took longer. When he finally reached out, it wasn't emotional. It was measured, controlled, almost like he had already accepted everything and was just trying to clean up what was left. He admitted he knew. He admitted he should have stopped it. But he didn't. That mattered more than anything else, because betrayal isn't always about what someone does. Sometimes it's about what they allow, and he allowed it. That I realized something during those days of silence. I wasn't angry the way I thought I would be. I wasn't looking for revenge, wasn't thinking about confronting them again, wasn't even interested in hearing more excuses. That I was done, completely. It's strange how quickly people can become strangers once you see them for who they really are. The same voices that once brought comfort started to feel distant. The same presence that once felt like home started to feel unfamiliar. That I stopped picking up calls. Stopped reading messages. Stopped giving them access to me in any form, not out of pride, out of clarity, because staying connected would have meant reopening something I had already decided to close. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the numbness started to shift. Not into happiness, not into peace, but into understanding. A quiet acceptance of what happened and what it meant. That I started seeing things differently. Trust isn't something you give blindly, no matter how close someone is. Loyalty isn't guaranteed by blood or history. And love, no matter how real it feels, doesn't make someone incapable of betrayal. That I learned all of that the hard way, but I also realized something else. What they did says everything about them, but how I respond says everything about me. That I could have stayed, could have listened to their apologies, could have tried to rebuild something that clearly wasn't worth saving. But that would have meant ignoring the one thing that still mattered. Myself. I chose distance. I chose silence. I chose to walk away without needing closure from people who already showed me who they were. Healing didn't happen overnight. It still hasn't fully happened. There are moments when memories come back, when certain thoughts hit harder than expected. But they don't control me anymore, because I don't see that part of my life the same way. That it's no longer something I wish didn't happen, that it's something I learned from. They didn't just break my trust. They forced me to rebuild myself without depending on anyone else. They showed me the cost of ignoring my instincts. They taught me that not everyone who stands beside you is actually on your side, and maybe that was necessary, because now, I don't confuse closeness with loyalty. I don't mistake words for truth. And I don't ignore the quiet signs that something isn't right. That if there's one thing I know for sure now, it's this: the worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you never thought you'd have to question, and once that line is crossed, there's no going back to who you were before, only forward, with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries.